David sat in the corner of his small living room, staring at the old wooden clock on the wall. The clock ticked slowly, the sound echoing in the silence. The house felt too big, too empty, and too cold. He had lived in this place for years, yet the walls still carried a heavy silence that pressed on his chest. Outside, the winter wind blew hard, rattling the windows. The whole neighborhood was quiet, but David felt the loneliness deeper than anyone else. He was not an old man yet, but his face carried lines of tiredness, lines of someone who had lived a life of giving more than receiving. He had once dreamed of laughter in this house, of footsteps running across the floor, of voices calling out his name. But life had not given him that. The silence stretched like a punishment, and every night he would sit in the same chair, staring into nothingness. He worked in a small repair shop during the day, fixing broken radios, old clocks, and appliances that people no longer cared about. At night, he returned to this quiet home, where even his own shadow felt like a stranger. But tonight was different. Something stirred inside him. His heart felt restless, as if it knew something was about to change. He stood up, grabbed his old coat, and stepped outside. The cold bit at his skin, but he walked anyway, letting his boots crunch on the frozen ground. As he turned the corner of the street, his eyes caught sight of movement near the bus stop. 3 small figures were huddled together, sitting on the stone bench with their knees pulled to their chests. They were shaking, their thin clothes no match for the cold. David slowed down. From a distance, he thought maybe they were teenagers fooling around late at night, but as he came closer, he saw the truth. They were children. One boy, perhaps around 10, tried to shield the other 2 with his small arms. A younger girl, maybe 8, was crying softly, her breath visible in the freezing air. The third one, the smallest, a boy no older than 6, was almost asleep, leaning against his brother. Their shoes were torn, and their faces pale with hunger and exhaustion. David's heart tightened. He looked around, half expecting an adult nearby, but the street was empty. The stores were closed, the lights dim, and only these 3 children remained, left to the cold night. He hesitated for a moment. His mind whispered warnings. What if they cause trouble? What if the authorities blame me? What if I can't handle this? He had so little already, barely enough to feed himself. Bringing 3 hungry children into his life seemed impossible. But then he looked again. He saw the boy holding onto his siblings with such desperate strength, trying to be brave when he was clearly just a child himself. He saw the girl clutching her torn sweater as if it could somehow protect her. He saw the smallest one, lips turning blue, drifting into dangerous sleep. David felt his chest ache. He knew what it meant to be unwanted. He knew what it meant to be abandoned. He had grown up in an orphanage himself, left behind by parents who never returned. He remembered the nights of cold, the emptiness in his stomach, the sting of being invisible to the world. Without thinking further, he walked up to them. Hey, his voice was gentle but firm. The children looked up in fear. The oldest boy quickly stood, putting himself in front of the others. We're not doing anything wrong, sir, the boy said, his voice trembling. David nodded slowly. I know. You're just cold. Where are your parents? The boy's eyes darkened. He shook his head but said nothing. The little girl whispered, They're gone. David's breath caught. Gone? Dead? Abandoned? He didn't ask. He saw enough pain in their eyes to know the truth didn't matter tonight. Come with me, David said softly. The boy frowned. Why? We don't know you. That's true, David admitted. But I know you'll freeze out here. My house isn't much, but it's warm. You can have some food. The children looked at each other. The girl's eyes begged her brother silently. The little one whimpered, too weak to argue. After a long pause, the boy finally nodded. Only for tonight, he said, his voice small but filled with pride. David smiled faintly. That's fine. Just tonight. He led them back to his house. They walked slowly, the children dragging their tired feet. When they entered, the warmth of the heater touched their frozen faces, and the youngest immediately curled up on the old sofa, falling asleep within seconds. The girl sat near the heater, rubbing her hands. The boy stood still, suspicious but desperate. David went to the kitchen. He had little food left, some bread, a bit of soup from earlier, and an apple. He placed everything on the table. The children hesitated at first, but hunger won. They ate quickly, whispering thank yous through mouthfuls. David watched quietly, his heart breaking and healing at the same time. For the first time in years, his house wasn't silent. The sound of chewing, the small coughs, even the girl's giggle when her brother made a funny face, it filled the emptiness like music. He leaned back, closing his eyes. When they finished, the children looked at him nervously. "We'll go in the morning," the boy said. David shook his head. "No rush. Sleep tonight. Tomorrow, we'll see." The girl asked softly, "Why are you helping us?" David paused. He could have said many things. That he felt sorry for them. That no child should sleep on the street. That he couldn't walk away because it reminded him of his own past. But instead, he just said, "Because no one helped me when I was your age. And I don't want you to feel the same." The girl's eyes filled with tears. She whispered, "Thank you, sir." That night, David gave them his bed while he slept on the chair. He watched them as they drifted into sleep, safe and warm for the first time in who knows how long. The little one curled into the blanket, the girl smiled in her dreams, and the oldest finally let go of his fear. As David sat in the dark, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. A sense of belonging. A sense of purpose. The silence was gone. His house, once empty, was now alive. But in the back of his mind, fear whispered again. What will happen tomorrow? Can I really do this? Will the world allow me to keep them? He didn't know the answers. All he knew was that tonight, 3 homeless children had found shelter in his home. And he had found something, too, something he didn't dare name yet, but something that warmed his heart even more than the heater could. David closed his eyes and whispered a promise into the dark. No matter what happens, I will protect them. And with that, the story of a man and 3 children truly began. The morning sun filtered weakly through the torn curtains of David's small home. For a moment, he thought the events of last night had been a dream. The silence he was so used to had returned, and he felt the familiar ache of loneliness pressing against his chest. But then he turned his head. There, in his bed, lay 3 children huddled together, still asleep. The smallest boy had his face buried in his sister's arm. The girl's hand rested protectively over her brother's shoulder. The eldest boy had his back against the wall, his body curled but his face tense even in sleep, as if he was still guarding them even in dreams. David's heart tightened. They were real. They were here. And now his life was about to change. He stood quietly, trying not to wake them, and went into the kitchen. His shelves were nearly empty, half a loaf of bread, some old jam, and 1 egg left in the basket. He sighed heavily. He had never had much for himself, but now with 3 hungry mouths in the house, what he had seemed like nothing. Still, he sliced the bread into thin pieces, spread the jam carefully, and boiled water for tea. When the smell reached the bedroom, the children began to stir. The little one rubbed his eyes, yawning wide. The girl smiled shyly at David when she saw the food. The eldest boy, however, stood tall, still suspicious. "You don't have to feed us," he said quietly. "We'll leave after breakfast." David shook his head. "Eat first. We'll talk later." The boy hesitated, then nodded. They sat together at the table, eating slowly at first, but soon their hunger took over. David watched them silently. Something inside him whispered that if they left now, they might never survive another night on the street. He couldn't let that happen. "Do you go to school?" David asked gently. The girl looked down. The boy shook his head. "Not anymore." David pressed his lips together. He had expected that answer, but hearing it still hurt. Children deserved classrooms, books, laughter with friends, not cold benches and empty stomachs. After breakfast, the children gathered their few belongings: an old backpack with a broken zipper, a doll missing an eye, and a small plastic car. That was all they had in the world. The eldest boy turned to David. "Thank you, sir. We'll be fine now." David stared at him. He saw the stubborn pride, the same pride he once carried as an orphan when he pretended not to need anyone. He couldn't let them walk out that door. "You won't be fine," David said firmly. "Not out there. You'll come with me. Just for now. Until we figure something out." The boy frowned. "Why would you do that for us? You don't even know us." David's voice softened. "Because someone should have done it for me once. Because I can't let children freeze on the street. And because, maybe we can help each other." The boy's eyes flickered, unsure. But the girl whispered, "Please," and that was enough. From that day, life in David's house changed completely. The struggles began almost immediately. Money was the first problem. David's repair shop barely earned enough for one man to survive. Now, with 3 children, every coin mattered. He worked longer hours, sometimes late into the night, fixing broken fans and radios. His hands became rougher, his back ached, but he never complained. At home, the children needed everything: clothes, shoes, school supplies. David couldn't buy much, but he did what he could. He found old coats from a thrift shop, patched up the holes, and gave them to the kids with a smile. The girl hugged hers tightly, whispering, "It's warm, Dad." That one word almost brought tears to his eyes. Food was another battle. Some nights, there was barely enough for everyone. David often pretended he wasn't hungry, pushing his portion toward the kids. "I already ate at work," he would say, though his stomach growled loudly in the silence. The children weren't fools. They saw his sacrifice, and though they ate, they promised themselves they would repay him one day. Then came the school challenge. David wanted them back in classrooms. He went to the local school, explained their situation, and begged the principal to let them join. The principal frowned at his torn coat, at the children's unkempt appearance. "Are you even their real father?" the man asked coldly. David hesitated, then said, "I am now." Reluctantly, the principal agreed. The children were enrolled, though whispers spread quickly. Other parents didn't like it. They told their children to stay away from those street kids. The first weeks were painful. The eldest boy, whom David had learned was named Ethan, got into fights when classmates mocked his siblings. The girl, Lily, cried when other children refused to sit beside her. The youngest, Noah, was too small to understand the cruelty but often came home with bruises from being pushed around. David tried to comfort them. At night, he sat by their beds and told them stories of bravery, kindness, and how even the smallest heart could carry the biggest strength. His words were clumsy, but his love was clear. Slowly, the children began to believe him. But the outside world was not the only challenge. Inside the house, struggles grew too. Ethan, being the eldest, often argued with David. He didn't trust easily. "We don't need pity," he would say. "We can survive on our own." David never raised his voice. He knew the boy's anger came from pain, from the fear of being abandoned again. He simply replied, "I'm not leaving you. No matter how hard it gets." Lily was different. She clung to David like a shadow, desperate for love, but also scared he would disappear. At night, she would whisper, "Promise you won't send us away." And every time, David promised, even when he wasn't sure how he would keep it. Noah, the smallest, grew attached the fastest. He followed David everywhere, holding his hand, asking endless questions. To him, David was already a father. His laughter filled the house, reminding David why the struggle was worth it. Neighbors, however, were less kind. Some whispered behind his back, "Why take in beggars? He can't even feed himself." Others warned him, "They'll betray you one day. They're not your blood." David ignored them, but the words cut deep. At night, when the children slept, he sat in his chair and wondered if he was strong enough. He was just one man. Could he really raise 3 broken souls? Could love alone fight against poverty, judgment, and the cruel system? His fears grew when a social worker arrived one afternoon. She stood at his door, her clipboard tight in her hands. "Mr. David," she said sternly, "we've been informed you've taken 3 children into your home. Without proper adoption papers." David's heart froze. The children clung to him, fear in their eyes. "They have no one," David argued. "Would you rather they sleep on the street?" The woman pursed her lips. "That's not the point. Without legal guardianship, you cannot keep them. We may have to place them in foster care." The words were knives. Foster care, David knew too well what that meant. Strangers' houses, cold treatment, being moved again and again. He had lived it. He wouldn't let these children suffer the same. "They're my family now," he said, his voice firm. "I won't let you take them." The social worker studied him, suspicious but not heartless. "We'll be watching," she warned before leaving. That night, Ethan whispered angrily, "We told you. They'll take us away. They always do." David looked him in the eyes. "Not this time. I'll fight for you. I swear it." And so, the struggle deepened. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Each day was a battle against hunger, against poverty, against the cold eyes of society. But within those struggles, something powerful was growing. The children began to smile more. They began to laugh. They began to call David Dad, not just in moments of need, but in everyday life. And every time, the word wrapped around his heart like a bandage healing old wounds. Yes, the world was against them. Yes, the future was uncertain. But inside that little house, a family was being built not by blood, not by law, but by love, sacrifice, and a promise made in the dark. And though David feared what was coming, though he worried about the next knock on the door, he knew one thing for certain: he would never let go of these children. Because they were his now. And he was theirs. The seasons changed slowly, but inside David's little house, the change was faster than anyone expected. What began as 3 frightened children clinging to survival started turning into something deeper. The struggles had not disappeared, money was still short, and judgment from the outside world still weighed heavily, but within those cracked walls, something stronger was forming, a bond. It began with the small things. One evening, David returned home after a long day at the repair shop. His hands were covered in grease, his shoulders aching, his stomach empty. He pushed open the door, expecting silence as usual. But instead, the smell of something warm drifted toward him. He froze. On the small table sat a pot of soup, steaming gently. The children stood nearby, waiting nervously. Lily held the spoon, her cheeks pink with pride. Ethan crossed his arms, pretending it wasn't a big deal, while Noah jumped excitedly, pointing at the pot. "We tried to cook for you, Dad," Lily said shyly. David blinked. The word hit him harder than any blow could. Dad. He hadn't asked for it. He hadn't even expected it. Yet here it was, falling from her lips like it had always belonged to him. He sat down slowly, his throat tight, and took a spoonful. It was too salty, the vegetables half-burned, but to David, it tasted better than any meal in the world. He looked at the children and smiled. "It's perfect," he said softly. From that day, the house began to fill with little gestures. Lily started drawing pictures and sticking them on the wall, clumsy crayon sketches of a man and 3 children holding hands. Ethan, though still guarded, began helping David in the workshop, learning how to fix broken radios and clocks. And Noah, full of endless energy, made it his mission to bring laughter into every corner of the house. David found himself smiling more, laughing more, feeling alive in ways he hadn't felt in years. The emptiness that had haunted his home was fading. He was no longer just surviving, he was living. But the bond was not only formed in joy. It grew stronger in the shadows of hardship. One rainy evening, Ethan returned home with a split lip and bruised knuckles. He tried to hide it, but David saw immediately. "What happened?" David demanded, his voice sharp with worry. Ethan looked away. Nothing. Just leave it. David knelt in front of him. Ethan, talk to me. The boy's eyes burned with anger. They called Lily names. Said she's trash because she used to live on the street. I couldn't just stand there. David's heart ached. He cleaned Ethan's wound quietly, his hands gentle but firm. You can't fight every battle with your fists, he said. Ethan snapped, what else am I supposed to do? Just let them insult her? Let them insult us? David didn't answer right away. He knew the pain behind those words. He placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. You don't have to fight alone anymore. Not everything has to be a battle. You have me now. You have a family. For the first time, Ethan's tough mask cracked. He lowered his head, whispering, I don't want to lose this, Dad. Not again. David's chest tightened. He wrapped his arms around the boy, holding him close. You won't. I promise. That night, Ethan finally let himself cry, not the angry tears of a boy fighting the world, but the quiet tears of a child who had finally found safety. Lily's bond with David grew in different ways. She became his shadow in the evenings, following him as he repaired broken machines. She asked questions, watched carefully, and sometimes even handed him tools. One night, when he was fixing an old clock, she leaned against his shoulder and whispered, When I grow up, I want to help people like you do. David chuckled softly. And what makes you think I help people? Because you fixed us, she said simply. The words hit David like lightning. He paused, staring at the clock in his hands, his throat suddenly dry. The little girl didn't know how powerful her words were, but David carried them in his heart from that moment forward. Noah, the youngest, was the light of the house. Every morning he would crawl into David's bed, waking him with endless chatter. Dad, do you think clouds taste like cotton candy? Dad, do you think dogs understand when we talk? Dad, when will we fly to the moon? His innocence healed wounds none of them realized they had. But Noah also had nightmares. Some nights, he would wake up screaming, crying for a mother who never came back. David would rush to his side, holding him until the tears stopped. Shoo, you're safe, David whispered. I'm here. And slowly, Noah would fall asleep again, clutching David's shirt like it was a lifeline. The bond between them became visible to outsiders too. The neighbors who once gossiped began to notice the change. They saw the children walking to school with cleaner clothes, standing taller. They saw David's tired but proud smile. Some still whispered, but others began to nod in respect. Yet, not everyone approved. The social worker returned, suspicious of how one man could handle 3 children without proper support. She inspected the house, looked at the half-empty cupboards, and frowned at the patched clothes. This is not enough, she said coldly. Children need stability. David stood his ground. They have love. They have safety. That's more than they had before. The woman looked at the children. Lily held David's hand tightly, Ethan stood protectively beside him, and Noah clung to his leg. Their eyes begged her not to separate them. For a moment, the woman softened, but then she hardened her face again. We'll be watching, she repeated before leaving. The children were terrified after that visit. That night, Ethan confronted David. What if they take us away, he demanded. David looked him straight in the eyes. Then I'll fight with everything I have. You're mine now. No one can change that. And for the first time, Ethan believed him. The bond was tested further one winter when money ran out completely. The heater broke, and David couldn't afford to fix it. The house grew bitterly cold. The children shivered under blankets. David worked nights at the repair shop, taking extra jobs, but it wasn't enough. One evening, he returned home to find the children had gathered candles around the room, making the place glow warmly despite the freezing air. They were sitting together, laughing, telling stories. When David walked in, Lily ran to him. Look, Dad. We made our own sunshine. David's eyes filled with tears. In the darkest cold, they had found light. They had each other. And it was in those moments, through hunger, through cold, through fear, that the bond grew unbreakable. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were becoming a family, one heartbeat at a time. But the world outside wasn't finished testing them. One day at the shop, David overheard two men talking. "Crazy, isn't it?" one said. "That guy David, he's raising 3 kids that aren't even his. What's the point? They'll leave him one day. They always do." The words cut like a knife. David pretended not to hear, but that night, as he sat by the fire, he found himself staring at the children and wondering if it was true. Would they leave him when they grew up? Would he be alone again? As if sensing his thoughts, Lily climbed into his lap and handed him a drawing. It showed a house, 4 stick figures, and above them, a sun. "That's us," she said proudly. "Forever." David smiled, his doubts fading. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe it. The bond they built in those years was not made of perfect days or easy times. It was built from hunger shared, from laughter despite the cold, from tears wiped away in the dark. It was forged in struggle, sealed with promises, and strengthened by every sacrifice. And though David feared the future, though the shadow of the system still loomed over them, he knew one thing with certainty: nothing could break what they had now. Because love had turned an empty house into a home. And in that home, a man who once had nothing now had everything. Years passed, and the children were no longer just frightened souls huddled in a stranger's house. They had grown taller, stronger, and braver. The little girl who once clung to David's hand was now a young woman with confidence in her steps. The boy who used to fight every insult with fists had learned to use words and determination. The youngest, who once hid behind blankets, now filled the house with endless laughter and dreams. David watched them grow with pride. His once empty home was now alive with footsteps, voices, and warmth. Every scar from his past felt lighter because of them. They called him Dad without hesitation, and he believed it every time. But life has a way of testing even the strongest bonds. Just when David thought they had left the worst behind, darkness crept back into their world. It began quietly. David worked at a small repair shop owned by a local businessman. For years, he had been the one people trusted with broken radios, clocks, and heaters. He never earned much, but he was honest, hardworking, and proud of what he did. Customers knew his name. They respected him. Then, one winter morning, everything changed. The police came to the shop. Sirens cut through the cold air, red and blue lights flashing outside the window. Neighbors gathered, whispering as officers stepped inside. David froze when they called his name. "David Carter?" "Yes?" His voice trembled. "You are under arrest for theft and fraud." The words struck like thunder. Before he could understand, they pulled his hands behind his back and snapped cold metal cuffs around his wrists. His tools clattered to the floor, scattering across the shop. "I didn't," he tried to protest, but the officer silenced him. "Save it for the judge." They dragged him outside. The crowd stared, their eyes filled with shock, disappointment, and judgment. "Wasn't he the one raising those street kids?" someone whispered. "I knew it." "No man does that without hiding something," another said. Their voices cut deeper than the cuffs. David bowed his head, shame burning his face. He wanted to shout, to tell them the truth, but his words stuck in his throat. At home, the children waited for him to return. When he didn't, worry grew into fear. Hours later, news spread like fire through the town. By the time Ethan, Lily, and Noah heard it, whispers were already twisting the truth. "Your dad's a thief. He stole money from his own boss. He's been lying all along." Ethan's fists clenched. Lily's eyes filled with tears. Noah shook his head in denial. "That's not true. Dad wouldn't do that. He wouldn't." But the world didn't care what they believed. To everyone else, David was guilty before the trial had even begun. The betrayal came from where he least expected. At the police station, David begged to speak. "I didn't steal anything. Please, let me explain." But then his employer stepped forward, waving papers. I trusted him, the man said loudly. And he betrayed me. Look at the accounts. Money missing. Repairs charged but never done. Who else could it be? He had access to everything. David stared at him in disbelief. That's not true. You know me. I've worked for you for years. I would never. But the man turned away. His voice carried to the officers. He's lying. He's always been a liar. You should check his house. Who knows what else he's hiding? David felt his knees weaken. This was not just an accusation. This was a deliberate betrayal. Someone he had trusted, someone he had served loyally, had turned on him to save himself. The officers didn't listen to David's pleas. They locked him in a cold cell. The iron bars closed with a clang that echoed in his chest. For the first time in years, he felt truly powerless. At home, the children faced their own storm. Neighbors who once smiled at them now avoided their eyes. Teachers whispered. Even friends distanced themselves. Lily overheard one woman say, "See? I told you." He took those kids in for sympathy. It was all a show. A thief can never change. The words broke her heart. She wanted to scream, to defend the man who had given them everything, but her voice failed. Noah cried for nights. Why are they saying this? Dad didn't do anything. He wouldn't. Ethan, though burning with anger, carried the weight silently. He clenched his jaw and promised himself he would not let the world destroy the man who had saved them. The trial came quickly. The courtroom was filled with people, some curious, some eager to see a criminal punished. David stood before the judge, his clothes wrinkled, his face pale from sleepless nights. The prosecutor painted him as a greedy man who used his good image to hide his crimes. He spoke of missing money, of records that showed David's handwriting, of false charges for repairs. David's lawyer was weak, unprepared. He stammered, failing to defend him. Every word felt like a nail sealing David's fate. The children sat in the back, their eyes wide with fear. They wanted to run to him, to tell the judge who he really was, but they were told to stay silent. Ethan clenched his fists. Lily sobbed quietly. Noah whispered again and again, "Please, don't take Dad away." When the prosecutor finished, the judge looked at David. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" David lifted his head, his voice trembling but clear. "I didn't steal. All I've ever had is my name, my honesty. I took in 3 children when no one else would. I gave everything I had for them. Why would I risk it all for a handful of coins? Please, believe me. I am not guilty." The courtroom was silent. For a brief moment, hope flickered. But then the employer stood again. "He's lying. He fooled those children, fooled the town, and now he's trying to fool you. He's nothing but a fraud." David's heart sank. He looked at the judge, but the man's face was unreadable. That night, in his cell, David sat in the dark. His hands trembled as he whispered to himself, "Is this how it ends? After everything? After all the sacrifices?" For the first time, doubt crept into his mind. Maybe the world had always been against him. Maybe love wasn't enough to fight lies and power. Maybe he would lose not only his freedom but also the only family he had ever known. Tears slid down his face, and he buried his head in his hands. He felt the heavy weight of betrayal pressing against his chest, crushing the hope he had built over years. But outside, something else was happening. The 3 children he had saved, Ethan, Lily, and Noah, were no longer the scared souls he had found years ago. They were stronger now. And as they sat together in their small home, they made a silent vow. They would not let their father face this alone. The world believed he was guilty. The system was ready to bury him. Even his employer had betrayed him. But they knew the truth. They had lived it, felt it, and breathed it every day in his house. And they were ready to fight for him. The bond they had built was about to be tested like never before. David had once promised them, "No matter what happens, I will protect you." Now it was their turn. Because no matter what the world believed, they knew one thing for certain. He was their father. And they would save him. The courtroom lights were dim, yet the weight of judgment hung heavy in the air. David Carter sat alone on the bench, his hands clasped, his eyes tired. Days in the cold cell had drained him, but it wasn't the stone walls or iron bars that broke him, it was the feeling that the world had already decided his fate. He had raised 3 children who weren't his own. He had given them food, warmth, and love. And now, when he needed the world's trust the most, all he saw were accusing eyes and whispers of betrayal. Still, somewhere deep inside, a flicker of hope remained. That flicker was tied to 3 faces: Ethan, Lily, and Noah. He didn't know how, but he believed they would not give up on him. The children's plan. At home, the children gathered in their small living room. The silence was thick. Lily's hands shook as she held a newspaper with David's name on the front page. Noah sat on the floor, hugging his knees, while Ethan stood by the window, his jaw clenched. "He didn't do it," Lily whispered. Her voice broke. "He couldn't have." Ethan nodded firmly. "I know. But knowing isn't enough. We have to prove it." "But how?" Noah asked, his young voice trembling. "Everyone believes the boss. They think Dad's guilty." Ethan turned, his eyes blazing with determination. "Then we'll show them the truth. If Dad could save us when the world turned its back, then it's our turn now." Those words lit a fire in their hearts. The frightened children who once depended on David were gone. In their place stood 3 young souls ready to fight for the man who had never abandoned them. Searching for clues. The next morning, they started their mission. Ethan, bold and fearless, led the way. He convinced Lily and Noah to search the repair shop where David worked. They slipped inside after closing hours, their hearts pounding with every step. The place smelled of oil and metal. Tools lined the walls. Old clocks ticked quietly. This was the shop where David had spent years working honestly. Somewhere here, they believed, was the proof of his innocence. Lily searched the drawers, flipping through receipts and repair logs. Noah crawled under the desks, looking for anything hidden. Ethan examined the shelves, his eyes sharp. Then Lily gasped. "Look at this." She held up a file of records. At first, it looked normal: lists of repairs, customer payments. But as Ethan flipped through the pages, he saw something strange. "These numbers, they don't match," he muttered. "The handwriting changes. Look, this part is Dad's writing. But here, it's different. Someone forged the records." Lily's eyes widened. "Do you think?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "The boss. He set him up. He blamed Dad to cover his own theft." Noah crawled out from under the desk, holding a small metal box. "I found this hidden here." Inside were stacks of cash, carefully wrapped. The 3 stared at it in shock. "This is it," Lily whispered. "This is what they accused Dad of taking. But it was here, all along." Ethan closed the box firmly. "Then we'll take it to court. We'll show them the truth." Facing the judge. The next hearing arrived. The courtroom was crowded again, filled with curious faces waiting for a guilty verdict. The prosecutor was confident, the employer smug. David sat silently, his heart heavy. But then the doors opened, and in walked Ethan, Lily, and Noah. Their steps were firm, their eyes determined. Gasps filled the room. "Those are the children," someone whispered. "The ones he raised." The judge raised an eyebrow. "And who are you 3? Ethan stepped forward. "We're his family. And we have something to say." The judge hesitated, then nodded. "Very well. Speak." Ethan held up the metal box. "This was hidden in the repair shop. Not in our house. Not with our Dad. In the place where the boss works every day." He set it down firmly. The courtroom murmured. Lily handed the judge the repair logs. These records prove it wasn't Dad. Look here, the handwriting changes. Dad's writing is neat, careful. These numbers here are different. They were forged. Noah, though nervous, spoke up. Our dad didn't steal. He doesn't even keep money for himself. He gave everything to us. Please, don't let them take him away. He saved us. He's not a thief. The room went silent. Their voices, though young, carried truth that no adult could deny. The employer's fall. The judge studied the evidence, flipping through the pages. He frowned. These records, indeed, the handwriting changes. And this box, why was it hidden in the shop? The employer stammered, sweat forming on his forehead. They're lying. Those kids are lying to protect him. That money, he must have hidden it there before he was arrested. But the judge's eyes narrowed. If that were true, why were these records forged? Why would the children risk bringing this to court if it could condemn their father further? The employer's voice faltered. The crowd began to murmur, suspicion shifting. Ethan's voice rang out. Because he's innocent. You framed him to protect yourself. The man's face turned pale. His lips trembled. For the first time, the crowd looked at him with doubt, not David. A father's tears. David sat frozen, his eyes wide. He had come to court prepared for another blow, another betrayal. Instead, he watched his children, stand tall for him. His throat tightened as he whispered to himself, "They came back for me." When the judge finally spoke, his voice was firm. This court will review this evidence carefully. Until then, David Carter is free on release. The accusations against him are no longer certain. Gasps filled the room. David's cuffs were removed. He stood, trembling, barely able to breathe. The children ran to him. Lily threw her arms around him, sobbing. Noah clung to his side. Ethan stood tall, his voice steady. We told you, Dad. We wouldn't let them take you. David's eyes filled with tears. He pulled them close, his heart overflowing. For years, he had been their protector. Now, they had become his. The return home. That night, they walked back together through the quiet streets. Some neighbors stared, unsure what to believe. But David didn't care. For the first time since his arrest, he felt free not just from the cell, but from despair. At home, they sat around the old wooden table. The same table where years ago, 3 frightened children had eaten their first warm meal. Now, those children had returned his gift of love tenfold. David's voice broke the silence. I thought I lost everything. But today, I saw the truth. I never raised you to be perfect. I just wanted you to be brave. And today, you proved you were stronger than I ever was. Lily wiped her tears. You saved us first. We just saved you back. Ethan nodded. This isn't over. We still have to clear your name. But we'll do it together. David smiled, his heart heavy but proud. Together, he repeated. The story was not finished. The battle was far from over. The world still doubted him, and the employer still had power. But something had changed forever. The man who had once opened his home to 3 lost children had given them more than shelter, he had given them courage. And now, they were ready to give it back. The return had begun. And this time, they would not stop until justice was won. The trial was not over. David Carter was free for now, but freedom without justice was like breathing with half a lung. Every step he took outside the courthouse was shadowed by whispers. Some people avoided him. Others looked at him with suspicion. His name was still stained. At night, David sat by the window of his old house, watching the stars. The children slept in their rooms, exhausted from all they had done. He whispered to himself, will this end? Or will I always be remembered as a thief? But deep inside, he knew one thing, he was not alone anymore. The employer's grip. The businessman who betrayed David still walked freely through the town. He smiled at neighbors, shook hands at gatherings, and told anyone who would listen, "Don't be fooled. David hid the money, then planted it back in my shop. That man cannot be trusted." His words were sharp and poisonous. For every person who believed David, there were two who doubted. And that doubt ate away at David's heart. But the children refused to stay silent. Ethan clenched his fists one night and said, "We need more proof. The logs and money helped, but it's not enough. We need something that destroys his lies completely." David sighed. "You've already done so much. I don't want you risking anything more." But Lily's eyes were firm. "Dad, you risked everything for us once. You gave us a home when no one wanted us. Now it's our turn. We can't stop halfway." Noah, the youngest, nodded. "We'll find the truth. We promise." David looked at them, these children he had once carried, fed, and protected. Now they were carrying him. His chest ached with pride and fear at the same time. A dangerous discovery. The children began their search again. They watched the employer's office. They followed his steps quietly. Ethan kept notes, Lily listened carefully to conversations, and Noah, with his small, unnoticed presence, slipped into places no adult would suspect. One night, Noah returned home with wide eyes. He carried a torn piece of paper he had found in the man's trash. On it were figures, numbers that matched the stolen money. Ethan studied it. "This is proof he kept records of what he took. If we can find the rest of these documents, we can prove he was the thief all along." But that was dangerous. The man was careful, powerful, and desperate. If he knew the children were digging into his secrets, he might try to silence them. Still, they pressed on. The final trial. Weeks later, the day of the final trial arrived. The courtroom was crowded again. Reporters, neighbors, and strangers filled every bench. The air buzzed with tension. David sat quietly, his heart heavy. His children sat behind him, holding hands. They were ready. The prosecutor stood, confident once more. "Your Honor, the evidence against David Carter remains strong. The money, though found in the shop, could easily have been hidden there by him. The forged logs? Perhaps a trick by these children to protect their so-called father." The judge nodded gravely. "And the defense?" David's lawyer stood, nervous as always, but before he could speak, Ethan rose from the benches. "Your Honor, may we speak again?" The judge studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Proceed." Ethan walked forward, holding a folder. "We found this. More records. Hidden in the employer's office. Look, these numbers match the stolen money exactly. And here, the handwriting, it's his, not Dad's." He handed the papers to the judge. The courtroom gasped. Lily stood next, her voice trembling but strong. "This isn't just about numbers. It's about who Dad is. He took us in when no one else would. He gave us food when we were starving. He taught us love when we had nothing. A man like that would never betray anyone." Then Noah, the youngest, stepped forward. His voice was small, but it pierced the silence. "If you take him away, you're punishing the wrong man. You're punishing us too. Because he's our father. Please, don't let the real thief win." The courtroom was silent. Some people wiped their eyes. Others bowed their heads. Truth revealed. The judge studied the documents carefully. He compared the handwriting, the figures, the dates. His expression grew stern. Finally, he turned to the employer. "Do you deny these are yours?" The man's face turned pale. He stuttered, "Those papers, they're forged. They must be." But the judge's voice cut like steel. "Enough. The handwriting matches samples we already have on record. These papers prove beyond doubt that you, not David Carter, stole the money." Gasps filled the room. The businessman's mask cracked. He shouted, This is a lie. I was careful, he's guilty. Not me. But the guards were already moving toward him. The judge's gavel struck hard. This court finds David Carter innocent of all charges. The case against him is dismissed. And as for you, he turned to the employer, you will face trial for theft and fraud. The courtroom erupted. Some cheered, others whispered in shock. But all eyes turned to David, who sat frozen in disbelief. A father redeemed. Tears filled David's eyes as the cuffs were removed once and for all. He stood shakily, turning to face the children who had saved him. Ethan smiled proudly. Lily was already crying. Noah ran into his arms, hugging him tightly. David's voice broke. You saved me. I thought I had lost everything, but you gave me my life back. Ethan shook his head. You saved us first, Dad. This was only fair. The crowd watched as the four embraced, a family born not of blood, but of love and sacrifice. The town's change. Word spread quickly. The man once whispered about as a thief was now known as a symbol of strength and truth. Neighbors who once avoided David now came to him with apologies. Some offered jobs. Others simply nodded with respect. But David didn't care about their approval. What mattered was the three souls who stood beside him. He looked at his children one evening as they sat together at the old wooden table. The world tried to break us, he said softly. But we stood together. And together, we won. Lily smiled. We're a family. Families don't give up. Noah nodded eagerly. We'll never let anyone hurt us again. Ethan leaned back, his voice steady. Because we know the truth. No matter what happens, we're stronger when we stand together. David's eyes glistened as he whispered, and that is justice. Closing scene. Years later, people still remembered the story of David Carter, the man who adopted 3 homeless children, the man betrayed by lies, the man who walked through fire and came out stronger. But for David, it was never about his name being cleared. It was about something far greater, love that stood against the world. He had given those children a home when they had none. And in return, when the world turned against him, they gave him something even greater, his life, his dignity, his justice. In the end, he was not remembered as a thief. He was remembered as a father. And that was the greatest justice of all.